They say some promises don't end when a man is gone. They wait for someone else to finish them. The rain fell steady over the small-town police station, tapping against the metal sign like a quiet warning no one seemed to hear. And beneath the flickering yellow streetlight stood a boy no older than 10, soaked to the bone, his small hands gripping a worn leather leash so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. "Sir, can you buy my dad's dog?" he asked again, his voice trembling just enough to break through the cold air. But the officers passing by barely slowed, some shaking their heads, others offering the same soft excuse. "Department policy. Kid, we can't take him." Until the boy nodded like he understood something far too heavy for his age, while beside him stood Rex, a retired K9 German shepherd with a coat dulled by time, but eyes still sharp, still searching, still waiting for a command that hadn't come in weeks, his ears twitching at every passing sound as if the world might suddenly make sense again. And across the street, leaning against the hood of an old pickup, Daniel Carter watched it all unfold in silence, his flannel jacket darkened by rain, his breath slow and measured, the kind of stillness that only comes from a man who has already heard too much noise in his lifetime. He wasn't looking for trouble, and he wasn't looking for anything at all, but something about the way the dog stood, alert, unbroken, pulled at a place in him he thought had long gone quiet, because Rex didn't look lost. Not really. He looked like he was waiting, and when the boy's voice cracked again, softer this time, "He won't listen to anyone else. My dad said he'd know what to do." The dog's head turned, not toward the boy, not toward the officers, but straight toward Daniel, as if some invisible thread had finally tightened. And for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Rex stepped forward, slow at first, then certain, crossing the wet pavement without hesitation until he stopped just inches away from Daniel, lifting his head and pressing it gently against the veteran's hand. No growl, no bark, just a quiet, deliberate trust that made Daniel's fingers stiffen before. They slowly relaxed against the dog's fur, warm despite the rain, steady despite everything. And in that single moment, something shifted, something neither of them could explain, because this wasn't how trained dogs behaved. Not without a command, not without a reason, and yet Rex stayed there, unmoving, as if he had finally found the one person who could hear what no one else could. And behind them, the boy whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. He never does that, not with strangers. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore, not fully, because somewhere beneath the sound of rain and distant traffic, he could feel it too. That quiet, unsettling sense that this wasn't about a dog being sold. And it wasn't about a boy asking for help. It was something unfinished, something waiting. And as thunder rolled low across the sky, Rex lifted his head slightly, eyes locked on Daniel's, as if asking a question only one kind of man would understand. Daniel did not pull his hand away, not even when the rain began to fall harder, sliding down the back of his neck and soaking into the collar of his shirt, because Rex did not move either. The dog simply stood there with a quiet steadiness that felt less like obedience and more like recognition. And that was what unsettled him, because he had seen that look before, not in a mirror, but in the eyes of working dogs overseas, the ones trained to sense things long before humans could name them, the ones who never acted without a reason. And yet here was Rex, choosing him, without a command, without hesitation, as if something deep inside that animal had already decided. And across the pavement, Ethan stepped closer, his shoes splashing through shallow puddles, his voice softer now, almost careful. "He has not eaten much since my dad, since he has been gone." The boy swallowed hard, his small shoulders tightening against the cold. "They say they are going to take him tomorrow, if no one buys him. Says he is too old to stay in service." Daniel glanced down at Rex, running his fingers slowly along the dog's damp fur, feeling the strength still there beneath the surface, not gone, just waiting. "How much are they asking?" he asked, quietly, his voice rough from disuse, and Ethan hesitated, as if the number itself carried weight. $300, he said finally. "That is what they said he is worth now." The words hung in the air, thin and fragile, and for a moment, Daniel almost laughed, not out of humor, but because he had seen what dogs like Rex were capable of. How they could find things buried deep beneath the ground, how they could sense danger long before it arrived, how they could save lives without ever asking for anything in return. and now this one stood in the rain, reduced to a number scribbled on paper, waiting to be taken away like something forgotten. But Rex did not seem concerned with any of that. Instead, he lifted his head slightly and looked past Daniel, toward the far end of the street where an old patrol car sat parked beneath a broken light, its paint dull, its windows fogged with time. And then, without warning, Rex pulled forward, the leash slipping from Ethan's hand as the dog moved with sudden purpose, not running, not panicked, but focused, like he had just remembered something important, something unfinished. "Rex, wait." Ethan called out, his voice breaking as he hurried after him. But the dog did not stop, his paws striking the pavement in a steady rhythm until he reached the car, where he paused, ears forward, body still, and then came the sound, 3 short, deliberate barks that echoed strangely against the quiet street. Daniel felt it before he understood it, that shift in the air, that subtle tension that meant something was about to reveal itself. And when Rex lowered his head and began pawing at the driver's side door, not wildly, but with intent, as if he knew exactly where to touch, Daniel stepped closer, his pulse slow but steady, because this was no longer about a boy asking for help, and it was no longer about a dog being sold. This was something else entirely, something waiting just beneath the surface, and as his hand reached for the rusted handle, he realized one thing with absolute certainty. Rex had not chosen him by accident. The metal handle felt cold beneath Daniel's hand, colder than it should have been, as if the car had been holding on to something long after it was meant to be forgotten. And for a brief moment he hesitated, not out of fear, but because the quiet around them had changed, the rain no longer just falling but listening. And Rex stood perfectly still beside him, eyes locked on the door, waiting, not impatient, not restless, just certain, and that certainty passed into Daniel like a memory he could not quite place. Slowly he pulled. The door creaked open with a tired groan, releasing a faint scent of old leather and something metallic that lingered in the air like a whisper. Inside the patrol car, everything looked ordinary at first glance. A worn seat, a cracked dashboard, a radio long since silent. But Rex stepped forward without hesitation, placing his front paws gently on the driver's seat before lowering his head toward the space beneath it, his breathing slow and deliberate. And then came the sound again, not a bark this time, but a low rumble, a signal that Daniel felt more than heard. "What is he doing?" Ethan asked quietly from behind, his voice barely rising above the rain. But Daniel did not answer, his focus narrowing as he leaned in closer, his fingers brushing along the edge of the seat, feeling the seams, the slight unevenness in the material, until he found it, a thin metal latch hidden just beneath the cushion, so subtle it would have gone unnoticed by anyone who was not looking for it. And for a second his hand froze, because something about it felt intentional, not factory-made, but placed there, hidden for a reason. Rex shifted slightly, nudging his hand with his nose as if urging him forward, and Daniel exhaled slowly before pressing the latch. A soft click echoed inside the car, followed by a slight movement beneath the seat, enough to reveal a narrow compartment carved into the frame, and inside, wrapped in a weathered cloth, was a small rectangular object no larger than a paperback book. Daniel carefully pulled it free, the fabric damp but intact, and as he unwrapped it, the faint glow of a small indicator light blinked once, then again, steady, alive. "What is that?" Ethan whispered, stepping closer now, his eyes wide with something between fear and hope. Daniel turned the object over in his hands, recognizing the shape, the weight. It was a recording device, older, but well-maintained, the kind used to store voice logs. And for a moment the world seemed to narrow around that single object, the rain, the street, everything fading into the background as a quiet realization settled in. This was not lost. This was left behind. Rex stepped back slightly, watching Daniel with those same steady eyes, as if the dog already knew what would come next, and Daniel's thumb hovered over the small button on the side, hesitating just long enough to feel the weight of the moment, because once something like this was heard, it could not be unheard, and yet something deeper than logic told him this was exactly where he was meant to be. He pressed it, and through the faint crackle of the speaker, a voice emerged, low, calm, and unmistakably human. "If you are hearing this, then I did not get the chance to finish what I started." Ethan's breath caught beside him, his small hand gripping the edge of Daniel's jacket, and Rex lowered his head slightly, ears tilting forward, listening, truly listening, as if the voice was not just sound, but something he had been waiting to hear again, and Daniel felt it then, not as a thought, but as a certainty settling deep in his chest. This was never about a dog needing a home. This was about a message that refused to stay buried. And somehow, against all reason, it had found its way to him. The voice on the recorder did not rush. It did not tremble. It carried the calm weight of someone who had already accepted what might come. My name is Officer James Miller, badge number 4172. And if this reaches the right hands, then Rex has done his job. The words settled into the air like something alive, something that refused to fade, and beside Daniel, Ethan stiffened, his small frame going still, as if even breathing might break whatever fragile connection had just been restored. "Dad," he whispered, barely audible, but the recorder continued, steady, measured. "There are things I could not put into reports, things that do not belong in official files, because not everyone wearing the same badge is standing on the same side." Daniel's grip tightened slightly around the device, his thumb resting along its edge as he listened, not just to the words, but to the spaces between them, the silence that carried meaning just as heavy. Rex shifted closer, his body lowering beside the open car door, ears angled forward with a focus that felt almost human, as if he recognized not just the voice, but the purpose behind it. "If anything happens to me," the voice went on, softer now, "this car holds what I could not risk bringing home. And Rex, he knows where to lead you." Daniel's eyes flicked briefly toward the dog, then back to the recorder, because that single sentence changed everything. It turned coincidence into intention. It turned a lost dog into something else entirely, something entrusted, something chosen. The rain began to ease, its steady rhythm fading into a softer patter against the pavement, as if even the storm was listening now. "I did not want Ethan involved in any of this," the voice continued, and at that, the boy's hand tightened around Daniel's sleeve, his fingers trembling slightly. "But if you are hearing this, son, then I need you to be brave a little longer, because what is hidden here, it matters." The words lingered, heavy but not hopeless, and for a moment Daniel closed his eyes, not to shut it out, but to steady himself, because he understood now. This was not just a message. It was a responsibility passed forward, one that had waited quietly beneath a seat, beneath time, beneath silence, until the right moment arrived. Rex let out a soft breath, almost like a sigh, his tail resting still against the wet ground, as if hearing the voice again had settled something deep inside him, something that had been restless since the day it was lost. Daniel opened his eyes again and looked down at Ethan, really looked this time, at the way the boy stood trying to hold himself together, at the quiet strength hidden beneath the fear, and something in Daniel shifted, not suddenly, but firmly, like a decision that had been waiting longer than he realized. The recorder crackled once more before the voice returned, quieter now, almost like a final echo. "If you choose to follow this, do not trust the easy answers." And then it stopped, the small light blinking twice before going still, leaving behind a silence that felt deeper than before. Daniel lowered the device slowly, the weight of it no longer just physical, but something far more permanent, something that had already begun to change the direction of everything. And as he glanced once more at the old patrol car, then at Rex, then at Ethan, one truth settled clearly in his mind. Whatever Officer Miller had started, it was not finished yet. Daniel did not speak right away. He simply stood there with the recorder still in his hand as the last trace of the voice faded into the quiet. And for a moment the world felt suspended, like everything was waiting for him to decide what came next. The rain now reduced to a soft drizzle that clung to the edges of the streetlight, turning the air into a thin silver haze. Ethan wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket. Though it was hard to tell what was rain and what was not, he knew. The boy said quietly, almost to himself, "Dad knew something would happen." Daniel nodded once, slow and thoughtful, his gaze drifting back to the open car, because now that he was looking with different eyes, the vehicle did not seem abandoned anymore. It felt intentional, like a place left behind on purpose. Rex shifted again, stepping deeper into the car this time, his paws careful, measured, his nose moving along the floor. then the dashboard, then pausing near the center console where the old radio unit sat dark and silent. Daniel noticed the movement immediately, the way the dog's focus sharpened, the way his body aligned with something unseen, and he followed, leaning in closer, brushing his fingers along the console until he felt it, a faint looseness along the edge panel, subtle. But there, Rex let out a soft, single huff, not urgent, just confirming. Daniel pressed gently, and the panel shifted slightly, enough to reveal a narrow gap. Inside, tucked behind the wiring, was a folded piece of paper, sealed in a clear plastic sleeve, protected from time and moisture. He pulled it free carefully, unfolding it just enough to see rows of names, numbers, and short notations written in neat, deliberate handwriting, not rushed, not careless. This was planned. What is that? Ethan asked, stepping closer again, his voice steadier now, though his eyes still carried that same fragile hope. Daniel did not answer immediately, his mind already moving, connecting pieces, because this was not random, this was structure, this was a record, and paired with the recording, it meant something far more serious than a simple note left behind. Rex backed out of the car slowly, sitting beside the open door, his posture calm but attentive, as if he had completed one step of a process he understood far better than anyone else. Daniel folded the paper back carefully and slipped it into his jacket, his decision forming not as a sudden choice, but as something inevitable, something that had been building since the moment Rex first walked toward him. He looked down at Ethan again, really seeing the boy not just as someone asking for help, but as someone who had already carried more than he should have to. You said they are taking him tomorrow? Daniel asked, his voice low but steady. Ethan nodded. Yes, sir. They said if no one buys him, he gets transferred out. Daniel glanced at Rex, then back at the car, then at the recorder still resting in his hand. And in that quiet space between moments, something settled into place, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty that felt stronger than anything else. Then we do not have much time, he said finally, and though the words were simple, they carried a weight that changed everything, because this was no longer about whether he should get involved. It was about how far he was willing to go. And as the wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint scent of rain and old asphalt down the empty street, Rex lifted his head, ears tilting toward the distance, as if sensing that whatever had been hidden was no longer content to stay that way. Daniel moved with quiet purpose now, not rushed, not careless, but with the steady focus of someone who understood that time did not always announce itself when it mattered most. He closed the patrol car door gently, as if respecting the space that had held on to its secret for so long, and slipped the recorder into his jacket beside the folded paper, keeping both close, not out of fear, but out of instinct, because some things were not meant to be left behind again. Ethan followed a step behind, his small footsteps careful on the wet pavement, his eyes moving between Daniel and Rex, as if trying to understand what had just begun to unfold. What do we do now? He asked, his voice carrying a quiet urgency that had replaced the earlier uncertainty. Daniel paused for a moment, looking down the empty street where the rain had washed away most signs of movement, the town settling into that late-hour silence where everything felt slower, heavier. We listen, he said finally, his voice low but certain, and we pay attention to what your dad wanted us to find. Rex stood close beside them, his body no longer tense, but alert in a different way, not searching wildly, but waiting, as if he had completed one part of his task and was now ready for the next. Daniel turned slightly, his gaze drifting toward the police station across the street, its windows glowing faintly under fluorescent lights, a place that should have represented answers, but now felt like something else entirely, not dangerous, not openly, but uncertain, and that uncertainty was enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled the folded paper out again, carefully opening it under the dim light. The ink slightly faded, but still clear enough to read. Names lined the page in neat rows, each paired with dates and short notations that did not explain themselves, just fragments, pieces of something larger. Do you recognize any of these? Daniel asked, holding it low so only Ethan could see. The boy leaned in, squinting slightly as he scanned the list, his brow furrowing as he shook his head. No, sir, but my dad used to write things down like that. said it helped him remember patterns. Daniel nodded once. That single word settling deeper now. Patterns, because this was not random. It was a trail. Something meant to be followed by someone willing to look beyond the surface. Rex shifted again, his ears flicking toward the far end of the block where a narrow alley cut between two older buildings, dark and quiet compared to the streetlights around them. Daniel noticed the change immediately, the subtle shift in the dog's posture, the way his head tilted slightly, as if catching a sound too faint for human ears. "What is it, boy?" Daniel murmured, his voice soft, and Rex responded not with a bark, but with movement, turning slowly and taking a few deliberate steps toward the alley before stopping to look back. Waiting, Daniel exhaled slowly, not surprised anymore, just aware, because this was how it worked now. Not questions first, but trust. Ethan hesitated for only a second before stepping closer to Daniel, his small hand gripping the edge of his jacket again. "You think he is showing us something?" the boy asked, and Daniel glanced down at him briefly before returning his gaze to Rex. "I think he has been trying to all along," he replied, and without another word, he started forward, following the dog into the dim stretch of pavement where the light faded and the air grew cooler, the sounds of the town falling further behind with each step. And as they crossed that invisible line between what was known and what had been left hidden, Daniel felt it again, that quiet pull, not fear, not doubt, but something deeper, something that told him they were no longer just uncovering a story, they were stepping into it. The alley swallowed the last traces of streetlight as Daniel stepped in, the air shifting colder, quieter, carrying the faint scent of damp brick and something older that had not seen daylight in years. Rex moved ahead with steady confidence, his paws making soft, deliberate sounds against the cracked pavement, not wandering, not hesitating, but following a path only he seemed to understand. Ethan stayed close, his breathing shallow but controlled, as if he was trying to match the calm that Daniel carried so effortlessly, even though the uncertainty pressed in from every side. "My dad used to say places like this hide more than shadows," the boy whispered, his voice barely above the sound of distant dripping water. Daniel glanced down briefly, then back ahead. "He was right," he said quietly, because this did not feel random. It felt chosen, like every step they were taking had been set in motion long before tonight. Rex slowed near the far end of the alley where an old service door stood recessed into the wall, its paint chipped and faded, the handle worn smooth by time. The kind of door people passed every day without ever wondering what lay behind it. But Rex stopped there, his body still, ears forward, his attention locked onto that single point as if the rest of the world had simply disappeared. Daniel approached slowly, his eyes scanning the frame, the hinges, the ground beneath it, looking for something that did not belong, something that matched the quiet intention they had already uncovered. And then he saw it, a faint marking just above the handle, barely visible unless you knew where to look, a small etched symbol, simple, precise, the kind of mark meant to be recognized by only a few. He reached out, brushing his fingers lightly across it, feeling the shallow grooves beneath the surface, and something about it felt deliberate, not decoration, but a sign. Rex let out a low breath, stepping closer, his nose hovering near the edge of the door, waiting, always waiting. Ethan leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of it. "Do you think my dad came here?" he asked, and Daniel did not answer right away, because the question did not need words, it needed proof. He tested the handle gently, expecting resistance, but instead it gave with a quiet, almost reluctant click, the door easing open just enough to reveal a narrow stairwell descending into darkness, the air rising from below cooler, still, carrying that same faint metallic scent they had noticed before, like something hidden beneath layers of time. Daniel paused at the threshold, not out of fear, but respect, because once they stepped forward, there would be no turning this back into something simple. Rex stepped ahead first, placing one paw on the top step before turning his head slightly toward Daniel, not questioning, just confirming. And in that moment, Daniel understood something clearly. This was never about uncovering something new. It was about continuing something that had already begun. He looked down at Ethan, who stood straighter now despite everything, his small hand no longer trembling, but steady, ready, and Daniel gave a slight nod, not a command, but an understanding shared between them. Then he stepped forward, following Rex down into the dim passage where the light from above quickly faded, replaced by a deeper silence that seemed to press in from all sides. And as the door creaked softly behind them, closing out the last trace of the world they knew, Daniel felt it settle once more, that quiet, undeniable truth. Whatever Officer Miller had left behind was waiting just a few steps ahead. The stairwell narrowed as they descended, each step carrying them deeper into a silence that felt untouched, the kind of silence that held its breath rather than filled the space. Daniel kept one hand lightly against the wall, his fingers tracing the rough concrete as his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering down from above. Rex moved ahead without hesitation, his form steady and sure, as if he had walked this path before in some distant memory that had never quite faded. Ethan followed, close behind, his small footsteps careful but determined, the faint echo of each step reminding him just how far they had come from the safety of the street. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a narrow corridor lined with old pipes and wiring, some hanging loose, others fixed in place like veins carrying something long since forgotten. The air was cooler here, still and heavy, carrying that same metallic scent that lingered in places where secrets stayed too long. Rex slowed near a corner, his ears tilting as he paused, then turned left without looking back. Daniel followed, his gaze scanning every inch of the space, not searching blindly, but reading it, the way a man learns to read silence after years of listening for what does not belong. The corridor ended at a reinforced door, thicker than the one above, its surface scratched lightly but not damaged, as if it had been used, but not abused. Rex stopped again, sitting this time, his posture calm but alert, his eyes fixed on the center of the door where a small keypad was mounted, dark but intact. Daniel stepped closer, his breath steady, his mind already turning over the pieces they had found, the list of names, the recording, the symbol etched above the alley door, none of it random, all of it connected. "My dad, he used codes sometimes," Ethan said quietly from behind, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Daniel glanced at him, then back at the keypad, the faint outline of worn numbers suggesting frequent use. He reached into his jacket and unfolded the paper again, scanning the rows, his eyes pausing on the dates written beside certain names, patterns. He thought again, not random entries, but sequences, something that could be followed if seen the right way. Rex shifted slightly, letting out a soft breath, not impatient, just present. Daniel focused, tracing the numbers with his eyes, lining them up in his mind until something clicked, subtle but clear. He stepped forward and pressed the first sequence into the keypad. The soft beep sounded too loud in the silence, followed by another, then another, until the final digit settled into place. For a moment nothing happened, and then came the sound, a low mechanical release from within the door, quiet but unmistakable. Ethan's breath caught beside him, his small hand gripping the fabric of Daniel's jacket again. But this time it was not fear, it was anticipation. Daniel pushed the door slowly, the hinges moving without resistance, revealing a room beyond. That was far different from the worn corridor they had just passed through. Inside, the space was organized, deliberate, shelves lining the walls filled with neatly labeled boxes, files stacked with precision. A desk at the center holding a single lamp that flickered faintly to life as if triggered by their presence, casting a warm but fragile glow across the room. Rex stepped inside first, his posture easing slightly as if he had reached the end of a long path. Daniel followed, his eyes moving across the details, taking it all in without rushing. Because this was not chaos, this was order hidden beneath silence. And on the desk, placed carefully as if waiting, lay another recording device, identical to the one in his pocket, its small light already glowing, steady and alive. Daniel stepped closer, his hand hovering just above it as a quiet understanding settled in his chest. This was not the beginning of the truth, it was the continuation, and whatever came next had been waiting here all along. Daniel did not press the recorder immediately, his hand hovering just above it as the soft glow of the lamp cast long shadows across the room. Shadows that seemed to stretch and settle like they had been waiting for someone to return. Rex moved closer to the desk and sat beside it, his posture no longer tense, no longer searching, but calm in a way that felt almost complete. As if the long thread he had been following had finally reached its end, Ethan stepped forward slowly, his eyes wide as they moved across the shelves, the files, the quiet order of everything his father had left behind. He built all this, the boy whispered, his voice filled with something deeper than surprise, something closer to understanding. Daniel finally lowered his hand and pressed the button. The device clicked softly, and after a brief moment of static, the voice returned, clearer this time, closer. If you are here, then you followed the trail the right way. The words carried a quiet certainty, not fear, not urgency, just trust. Everything in this room is a record, not of what people said, but of what they tried to hide. Daniel's eyes moved slowly across the shelves again, seeing them now not as objects, but as pieces of a larger truth, something built carefully, patiently, over time. I could not bring this forward alone, the voice continued, not without risking it being buried before it could be seen. Ethan took another step closer to the desk, his hand resting lightly on its edge. As he listened, his breathing steady now, stronger than before. But truth has a way of waiting, the voice said, softer now. And sometimes it waits for the right people to carry it forward. Daniel felt that sentence settle into him, not as a burden, but as something chosen, something he had stepped into without realizing it until now. Rex lifted his head slightly, his ears tilting forward as if acknowledging the voice one last time. If you are hearing this, then Rex trusted you, the voice added, and Daniel glanced down at the dog, his hand moving instinctively to rest against the top of his head, feeling the quiet strength still there. Take what is here and bring it into the light, not for me, but for the ones who deserve to know. The recording paused briefly, then continued with one final line, softer, almost like a farewell. And take care of my son. The light on the device blinked once, then faded, leaving the room in a gentle silence that no longer felt heavy, but complete. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, his shoulders rising and falling with a slow breath before he looked up at Daniel, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone standing beside him in something larger than either of them. Daniel nodded once, a quiet understanding passing between them without the need for words. He reached out and gathered a small stack of files from the desk, holding them carefully, not as evidence, but as something that mattered, something that had waited long enough. Rex stood, stretching slightly before stepping closer to Ethan, pressing gently against his side, no longer guiding, no longer searching, just there, steady and present. And as the three of them stood in that hidden room beneath the quiet town, something shifted beyond the walls, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the subtle way truth begins to move when it is no longer hidden. And for the first time since the rain began, Daniel allowed himself to feel it fully, not the weight of what lay ahead, but the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be, because some missions are not given, they are found, and once found, they are meant to be finished.